Walking over here today, Gary asked me, are we going to see any more fish? And the answer is no, not this week, not next week. We're out of the water for a while now. So we're really getting onto land here with amniotes. So animals, mammals and reptiles today that lay eggs on land do not have to be tied to water for any of their life history. They can go in if they want, and many of them do. Getting into those origins today, and then focusing on the reptile side of things, at least in the Paleozoic. So the last couple of periods of the Paleozoic, the Carboniferous and the Permian, have plenty of reptiles. Although next week, when we get into the mammals or mammal relatives, I think that's a lot of the animals are the most famous from these periods. But we're doing reptiles in here today. So just to orient you back where we were last week, when I saw you that one time on Thursday amongst these tetrapods, we have back in the Devonian, our fishes crawling out of water, amazing diversification very quickly in the Carboniferous of lots and lots and lots of different amphibious, probably lineages, meaning lineages that are laying their eggs in the water, almost certainly. Lots of interesting habitats, plenty of organisms that stay in the water, remain aquatic, some that poke up onto land, all over the tree. So again, not a directional pattern here. And on Thursday, we talked about some of the amphibians. Today's amphibians are right here in this bigger group of temnospondyle animals. And then I told you last week, we're going to spend today going to the right-hand side. So the right-hand side here of the tetrapoda crowns, the common ancestor of today's amphibians and today's amniotes, is this tetrapoda crown group. And the right-hand side of this, we'll say on this tree anyway, is the reptilomorphs, the animals that are closer to amniotes than they are to the living amphibians, even though a lot of the animals you're about to see today are themselves probably living amphibious lives. We don't know that for sure. We don't usually find fossils of eggs and babies of animals, especially that are this old. I wanted you to see this now that we're going towards amniotes. To me a little bit. The meme that came out when I was in college, and I love this very much, and you might not. You might not get it, I don't care. I show this to every class where I teach this. Congratulations if you're singing the song in your head right now. But that is how I like to think about tetrapod evolution. And so you're welcome. Okay. So let's go look at what these groups look like. I think a pattern you're going to see again and again and again in this course. And so I'll refrain from like beating you with it too much. But I think this is a lot like you guys met so many stem gnathostomes, jawless fishes that are still closer to jawed vertebrates today than the ones that still don't have jaws. So they're stem gnathostomes, even though they don't have jaws, those osteostracans, all of armored heterostracans. And something I hope you could appreciate in those Silurian and Devonian oceans was that it wasn't like jawless fish led to jawed fish, and then there was like a turnover event. For many, many tens of millions of years, the jawless gnathostomes lived alongside the stem gnathostomes in very diverse ways, very successfully. And the same is true here. These are animals that are closer to amniotes than they are to the living amphibians, but they are probably almost certainly not laying eggs on land and living an amniotic life. But for tens of millions of years, they live alongside those animals and are quite successful. So I'll show you a few here. Nice artistic reconstructions, some cool fossils. Here's another clade that has armor all over its back, which are really fun. You guys know your vertebrae now, so I hope you can tell what's the neural arch, what's the centrum. And maybe you can see that on top of that neural arch is this piece of armor fused to it on this animal's back, which is really cool. I'm gonna do a quick little walk around the room, take in some observations about these animals, what you notice about them, not looking for anything in particular.
Really dancing on that line. Yeah. Research to bios. I see a little more of that tall school as well. Yeah. Maybe it's cool. Looks more like reptile. Kind of like that all reconstruction is all right. Yeah.
Anything to note? I don't have a lot I can really tell you about these things. I think they're all kind of like 5 fingers, 5 toes, some in the water, some on land. Samoria is one that's almost totally a terrestrial animal. It's got really robust limbs, and we think it's living its life on land as an adult anyway, almost completely. Things like Anthracosaurus are probably aquatic predators, big scary teeth in Anthracosaurus. What else are people talking about? Yeah.
Thought the teeth look very good.
How do you mean?
It's kind of like that, like canine shape.
Yeah, the teeth are reptilian, so they're big. Maybe we can think of that big sharp teeth, like set into the jaw. A lot of the amphibians have like smaller, for lack of a better term, and this is not very anatomically precise, like delicate looking teeth. Whereas these teeth might look like they're embedded in these bones a little more. I hope you guys can look at things like this now and be like, I know that's a maxilla, I know that's a lacrimal, and I know that's a nasal. Maybe you don't do that, but you do know that, whether you did it or not. But okay, let's go forward here. So you can see there's a whole bunch of these groups. I don't want to get too drowned out in the diversity. Again, one of my goals in this course is always to like show you guys the diversity, to expose it to you so you can like think about it. Maybe you get interested in something and look it up on your own. But I will talk about a few of these groups. There's a lot of diversity here that I'm not including because there's actually like a big number of like contentious clades in this part of the tree. There's like very active debate that ISU is involved in on amniote origins right now, which is really cool. But I will show you this group. This group is probably not monophyletic. It's been around for decades. Scientists have tried to put these animals together in this big clade called lepospondylus. I think it's about to totally be dead as a monophyletic clade. But I want you guys to take a look at these lepospondylus. These are almost certainly amphibious animals. Here's some of their body plans. Here's some of their skulls. Here's some of their bodies. I'll just show you that. Look at these lepospondylus, talk to each other, make some observations about this clade. You can see they live for tens of millions of years. Very successful. Tell me about lepospondylus.
They think like one group, maybe, you know, like kind of dumb parts, like they might be a part. They pick up one thing, like it's all and islands, just like this stuff. Yeah, they're all. I can barely tell. I don't really have a lot of data over cells. Yeah. Like if this was diverse clay. Yeah. Oh, and that was certificate. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know there's also certificate for rat. Those two for sure.
Yeah.
These are you're very
good.
I would imagine reptiles.
They're on the reptilomorph side of tetraploda. They're not.
I always wondered if you could actually.
Reptiles and mammals are both together up in amniote still. We haven't broken out yet.
Right shape. I mean.
So this is a really fun clade. There's a lot going on here. By the way, even if this clade gets broken up a little bit, which might happen in the next couple years, there's still going to be like a burrow one and a wormy one and a snaky one and a swimmy one, even if it stays monophyletic, but just some of them will get pulled away. One of the things I think is really crazy about this group is like long bodies evolves if they're monophyletic, sure, it's multiple times. Even if they're not monophyletic, it's still multiple times within these early amniote relatives. That like body elongation and limb reduction, look at these little arms.
Yes.
Look at these little legs. Look how much body there is between the arms and the legs. That happens multiple times. The burrowing happens multiple times and in totally different ways. Animals like Nanoraptor right here has this snout that looks exactly in its like, I shouldn't say exactly, in its most superficial way. There's moles and lizards today that burrow with their noses. They move the dirt like this. They have stout muscles in their neck. That's what this thing's doing. Animals like this, Lysirophis, Brachydectes, they're also probably burrowing, but a completely different way, like with their whole bodies. So it's really complicated. You guys might be able to imagine that if we only have fossils to look at to figure out the evolutionary relationships of organisms, we can only look at their anatomy. If they keep doing things like becoming long and reducing their limbs, if they keep evolving different ways of burrowing, there's only so many ways to use your face to burrow. They're going to convergently evolve these things that makes it really difficult for us to pull apart their relationships, because the burrowers, in terms of their anatomical details, are going to look like each other, and the sneaky ones are going to look like each other. And then you'll have animals like this, or this, which who knows what to do with this, that like fall in the middle, because you look at the brain case, and they all maybe have the same kind of brain case characters, but then boomerang head versus burrowing versus snake body. It's really messy and really fun. And this is one of those parts of the phylogeny where like people focus today on like, I'm a fish scientist, I'm a dinosaur scientist. And these animals are kind of floating in the netherworld where like they're not related to anything today. So you can always see in the literature that people are like, okay, and like walk around them because it's complicated. What were you guys talking about? Or do you have any questions about these things? Pantylus and Diplocalus are usually the only two that people are like, if that was alive, I would go to the pet store for sure. So the boomerang head, there's a lot of diversity here. It's not just Diplocalus. Nobody knows what's going on with the boomerang head. Nobody knows if the skin attaches right here and goes right there, so it has like a wing face. It's definitely a pretty heavy skull, even though it has that boomerang shape. Those go into burrows too, though, sometimes, which is very weird to imagine.
We were commenting on how that boomerang head shape and the eyes on top of the head
Yeah.
seem to be conserved with early tetrapod evolution. And I wonder how much of that might have to do with fossilization bias. Are these ground dwelling, mud dwelling creatures?
So
fossilization.
certainly something we're going to see. I mean, we've been seeing it, but because it's fishes, you guys probably haven't thought about it. We're going to see that animals that like live their lives in freshwater ecosystems are hugely overrepresented in the fossil record. Once turtles evolve, the turtle fossil record is outstanding. There's tons and tons and tons of fossil turtles, because turtles live in a place where when they go and they sink to the bottom, it's really high chance of fossilizing. A lot of animals that live on land and rainforest and deserts, super low chance of ever getting buried at all. So a lot of animals that live, in this case, like freshwater ecosystems, they're just, yes, you're right, preferentially likely to be preserved. Yep, for sure. These are fun, and it's fun. So one of the grad students here at ISU, he and I just submitted a manuscript on these animals, or we're going to submit it this week, which I'm pretty excited about. It's my first time publishing on these little guys, and they're very weird. They have probably evolved the snake thing like 4 or 5 times, not like twice. So dumb, but it's also pretty fun. Also, they have a bunch of crazy names. All of their names have to do with like, well, I can't even say this because I'm recording this, but we named some nucleids of these things all after like levels of hell, because there's levels of hell where like worms and snakes will eat you in Norse mythology, and so we're like, let's go for it. Anyway, the next like kind of tick up the tree are these animals called diadectomorphs. Diadectomorphs are have been known for quite a long time. Back in like the 50s and the 60s, I'm sorry, even the 40s. These were the animals that everyone was like, that is really close to an amniote. That looks like a land-living animal. And certainly as an adult, I definitely think that's true. Their reproductive biology, we're not sure of. They might still be laying their eggs in the water. They might be laying eggs on land. We don't know this. But certainly as the adult forms have, then their skeletons, a lot of really well ossified bones. You can see their humerus, their femur, their fingers, their toes. You guys can see the really massive pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. They are quite capable on land. These are locomoting on land absolutely as adults. What is cool about them to me is within this clade, we're starting to see some of the really obvious tetrapod, or we can even think of it as amniote, like niche spaces getting occupied. This animal here, Limnoceros, I probably could show this to like any class of second graders and be like, what does Limnoceros eat? And they're all like, that dude looks like it's a carnivore. And so it does have these really big mouthful of sharp teeth. And so this is an animal on land, and with teeth that are different shapes and sizes, teeth that independent of the bones are making this like trap for grabbing struggling prey, big meaty prey. This is like probably almost certainly a terrestrial predator. And this is something that's happening down in the Permian here in this animal that's not an amniote. Maybe more interesting basically every animal you've met in this whole class so far is a predator. Carnivory is the default for animals. You eat other animals. Becoming an herbivore is something we're going to start to talk about a lot in this class as tetrapods become the vertebrates that go for herbivory, become plant-eating animals. And Diadectes has been famous in paleontology for a long time as one of the earliest terrestrial herbivores. And so this is Diadectes' skull here in ventral view. You guys can see this is where the jaw muscle is attached. So you're looking at the skull from the bottom. Look at these big teeth Diadectes has. Look at the specimen right there. Talk to your neighbors for a quick second about Diadectes. What do you notice about its teeth?
Like mold. It's like kind of mold stuff. Like it's still. Yeah. Very little release, I think. Part of this very bad. Yeah. Something here. So cool. I really hope something would figure out. Yes. Yeah, just look at that skeleton. So awesome. Yeah. That's like produced. And then like there are more stuff. They all the produced. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah.
Like the big straight up as a star hat is a weird tadpole.
All right, so I'm hearing you guys, I'm hearing the discussion, so I'm happy with that. Like, you can see that the names of the teeth in your mouth, humans made up the names for these teeth, incisor and canine and premolar and molar, and those words are mammal words. And so when I talk about other animals, I always have to say incisiform and malariform, because these are teeth that are functioning like mammal teeth do function today. So in the back, these cheek teeth, wide molar tooth are teeth probably for chewing up plant matter, processing the plant matter. You guys can see how they are labiolingually expanded, right? Back there in the jaw. And then how about these front teeth? Anybody notice anything about the front teeth, the incisiform teeth?
You look at they're good at snipping leaves.
Snipping leaves, they are, the word we could use is procumbent. They stick out from the skull. When this thing's mouth is closed, like a horse, the teeth are sticking out forward a little bit. So yeah, you can infer on that. You can also do things like at the fossils, look at the wear patterns. You can look at how the teeth have been worn down and see if it's been used to snip plants. Like you can literally see that. And so eating plants is a big deal. This is the first time we're seeing a terrestrial tetrapod sitting there eating like vascular plant, probably things like ferns and horsetails, but all kinds of other stuff we don't know. Plants relative to meat, there's a trade-off. We're going to talk about it a lot later in class, but a trade-off between being an herbivore and being a carnivore. If you're an herbivore, your food is everywhere. It's pretty easy to find, but it's not that great to eat in terms of its nutrition count, like per unit weight. You have to eat a lot of plants to match like the protein that this animal is going to get or the nutrients this animal is going to get in the meat it's eating. And so you need to find ways to digest those plant materials because they are per pound, like per unit, not as nutritious. And so something we see in Diadectes is relative to its even its close relatives is this big expansion of its like gut, basically. Its rib cage and the posterior part of its like, you guys can think of it as its like torso. And so what we think is going on here is this animal's not only showing adaptations for snipping vegetation, chewing a little bit vegetation, but also having a big vat stomach where it can process plant matter. Plant matter can sit there, move through the system, be digested for a long time, and this animal can maximize getting nutrients out of plants because it's got this big capacious gut. There's lots of ways we're going to see that come around. I want to encourage you guys as we move through the rest of time to the present, how many times you see adaptations like this amongst herbivores. It's very cool to me how the realities of eating plants dictate things on the vertebrate skeleton again and again and again. So keep your eyes out for that. All right. Amniotes. We are amniotes. Iguanas are amniotes. Hummingbirds are amniotes. We're all right here. Amniote does absolutely show up in the late Carboniferous, and there's a mammal side and a reptile side. And we're going to get into those amniotes today. Oh, yep, here we go. I want you to see this piece of art, as you can see, only about 6 years old now. I was like stunned when I saw this piece of art. There are so many nuances to this thing. I want you guys to take a second, look at this. What can you infer from this just as a, I'm just gonna say a piece of art. I was gonna say a painting. A piece of art What can you learn about the history of life on Earth? What is this person trying to show us? There's a lot of details here. So go ahead and talk to your neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's like, you know, like strategy. It's prevalent people thought. You know. Yeah, these guys. Yeah. To I don't think this would be you're trying to say something like you start out like that. You just everything. Yeah, like right. Everything else. Yeah. Looks like everything's illustrated. Yeah.
All right, what are some things we're noticing or thinking we can infer? What are we looking at here?
That they're laying eggs on land now.
So we got eggs on land. Fantastic. So many things I think you could say.
They have different strategies for camouflage.
Different colors. Tell me more about the colors. What do you guys? What's your brain doing when you see these two animals with these color patterns?
Sexual display.
Maybe displays, sure. What are the things? There you guys talking a lot.
Aggressive display.
Aggressive, sure. Animals being animals, that's for sure. What else?
Is there evidence of a man?
Oh, not that I know of. Well, what are these? Do you think? I mean, you don't know, right? I'm showing you this. I'm not giving you anything here. What are you inferring? If you're bringing
Sexual dimorphism.
So if they're the same thing, they're not supposed to be the same thing.
Oh.
Really lizardy looking.
They're both pretty lizardy looking. I like that. Don't they look kind of the same? That's not, I mean, to say, oh, sexual dimorphism, because they look the same, right? At a glance, these look like the same animal. So like. Lizard-like looking animals. So if I told you one of these is supposed to be the earliest mammal relative and one of these is supposed to be the earliest reptile relative, do you think you know which one's supposed to be which? Talk to your neighbors.
Well, every part plus the people. I feel like that I feel like that's got an intention. Yeah, we not have.
Don't overthink it. Yeah, so what do you guys think, Tobias?
I mean, I'm leaning toward the brown as being a synapse.
Yeah, so this artist is making the mammal looking one be brown and the reptile one look like a scary lizard, which is really fun because these animals are so close to their common ancestor in terms of their body plan, almost identical, but they're not quite identical. That is so cool to me. Blue whales, humans, elephants, T-Rex, boa constrictors. That's crazy, right? But back then, the Carboniferous, really, really similar. So this is an artistic choice. We don't know what colors these are, but like the mammally one equals brown, and the reptile one equals, I'm gonna say squamate, like a modern lizard, vibrant. That's fun. I didn't hear anybody say it, but one of the reasons I like this art so much is because this split between Amniote, the reptile and mammal line, happens near the end of the Carboniferous, which is when those global coal forests are collapsing. And this picture is just full of all these broken trees. They're rotting. There's fungus on them. You know, this ecosystem change is happening in the background of this picture. So those huge forests that all these aquatic tetrapods and fishes have been in for tens of millions of years are falling away. We're gonna lose that. And that's in this picture too. There's other things here, but thank you for humoring me. Yeah.
I'm just curious if there's any reason for the scaly bark.
Yeah, these are both supposed to be, I don't know if it's supposed to be the genus or whatever, but Lepidodendron, like a giant club moss that has.
They're also known as scale trees because they have that sort of scaly texture.
They look like a Lorax tree.
If you look at something like a moss, really, if you look at something like a moss really close up, you're gonna see if there's a similar texture on that.
So if you guys Google club mosses, it's a kind of plant today that's not very diverse, but back in the Carboniferous, there were like trees that were, hundreds of feet tall that were in the club moss clade, which is really cool. So at this time, there's plants that have seeds, but no. There's a few lineages that are like related to today's seed plants, but nothing that you guys really know, besides the ferns and the horsetails being really obvious. Anyway, I just think this is great because it has so much stuff. Look at the little armor on this little reptile dude. That's so silly. Anyway, thank you for humoring me. So Archaeothyrus, Paleothyrus, these are two of the animals. That one's on the reptile side probably, and this one's on the mammal side. But I like the sexual dimorphism comment from Paul, because like these animals do look pretty much the same. That's cool. All right, so here we are on our modern tetrapod phylogeny. You guys have a bunch of tetrapod characters I've given you, right? From a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the fish, Sarcopterygian coming up onto land. We learned about less amphibians on Thursday last week. Now here we are going up into amniotes. I've got two characters for you for amniota. And of course, once we're in amniota, we got to split to today's mammals and today's reptiles. First time I taught this class in uses phylogeny, one of the students was upset that I used a possum instead of a human. And I was like, no, deal with it. That's us, we're the possum. Okay, two amniote characters for you. The first one is the big one. We only know it from the modern. It's very difficult to infer its presence in the past. I'm sure some of the animals that are outside crown group amniotes, outside the common ancestor of today's reptiles and mammals, might have had amniotic eggs. We just don't know that. But we can put it at the node for sure, because the amniotic egg is definitely inherited by all mammals and all reptiles today. So here's some baby crocodiles. Here's some baby boa constrictors. And then this thing right here, anybody know what that is? Looks like a little blob. This is a baby echidna, a baby mammal from Australia hatching out of its egg. So the amniotic egg is ancestral for all of us amniotes. Most mammals today don't lay eggs, but there are absolutely some that you can watch them lay eggs, and you can watch those eggs hatch right now in a zoo. And so when we talk about the amniotic egg, it's not like a lot of the details of the egg. There's parts of the shell that are interesting, but that's not what we're talking about. Some animals lay hard eggs like birds. Some animals lay soft eggs like snakes. The hard shell, that has nothing to do specifically with when we say an amniotic egg. When we say an egg is amniotic, we're talking about this very specific pouch that's around the little embryo called the amnion. The amnion is a pouch of fluid that allows the baby to remain basically in a little pond. It's like its mom is a frog laying her tadpoles in a pond. The pond is within the egg. It's a little floating area for the embryo to develop. It's still attached to its yolk, which is giving it nutrients. And this structure, which is where its waste gets deposited. Interestingly, of course, in us mammals, we'll talk about it later, these surfaces fuse with the mother's body to the placenta, which is really cool. But even in all amniotic eggs, these are the basic structures, and the amnion is the feature we're really talking about here, a little sac around the actual embryo deep within the egg. So that's the amniotic egg. One thing that's really interesting about reproductive ecology that we can talk about when we talk about amniotic eggs is how fertilization happens. Tons and tons and tons of fishes, certainly a lot of the actinopterygians, and almost all the frogs, spawn. We use the word spawn. They lay their eggs in the water, they put their sperm in the water, and out there in the pond, out there in the ocean, the sperm and the eggs meet up. Maybe the animals get themselves into close proximity. The actual fertilization event is still happening outside of their bodies. One thing that has to happen for amniotes is the female almost always puts some kind of shell around the fertilized embryo so the baby can grow up in an egg. She has to do that within her body, and so internal fertilization of the egg is part of the evolution of amniota. And so we can look across all the amniotes today to infer those things, and that really changes everything. People talk about the egg when they talk about the terrestrial adaptation to land, but there's also like these different adaptations for internal fertilization. This picture makes some people like squint your eyes. So these are like intramittent organs, AKA penises, that definitely evolve in all these different amniotes. And so if you've never seen a tortoise or a crocodile or a double snake penis, you're welcome. But that's what they look like, right? So part of amniotic evolution does have to do with the egg, but it also has to do with the ways that animals fertilize their eggs. So that's really cool. And so the reproductive biology of these animals can get really interesting. When you are not just like giving your gametes to the water, when you have to be internally fertilized to create an embryo, sexual selection and mate choice becomes incredibly important. Because it's not just like my sperm and my eggs are out there. I'm gonna mate with her, he's gonna mate with me. There's choice involved. And so sexual display will then drive a lot of evolutionary patterns that maybe aren't as common in animals that are broadcast spawning. Does that make sense? Very interesting. The other feature, besides the amniotic egg that I want to give you guys for amniotes, is lateral temporal fenestration. So here's a skull, kind of a generalized skull of an early tetrapod animal. You guys can see the maxilla, the premaxilla, right? The lacrimal, beautiful. Here's all these bones at the back of the skull, and the big hole you see in the side of most of these skulls, the diadectids you just met, some of the lepospondals you just met. The only big hole they have is the eyeball, the orbit where the eyeball would sit. Once we get into amniotes, there's a second hole on the side of the skull. It's called fenestra. Fenestra just means window. There's many, many, many fenestrae across the tetrapod skeleton. And so if we look at this dinosaur, a stegosaurus, it's got one right there. And here's a mammal relative, Dimetrodon, which you guys might know, this cool animal with a sail on its back, not a dinosaur, a mammal relative. It also has this hole there on the back of its skull. So a lateral, meaning on the side, temporal fenestra. That's for jaw muscles to attach onto. Jaws attaching to the lower jaw are originating up here on the skull and coming down. So this is increased surface area for moving the jaw around. There's a lot of very interesting patterns here we can talk about. These features are in like every textbook you've ever checked, if you ever bother to check, on like what characters define a lot of the tetrapod groups. The architecture of their skulls and their jaw muscles is a really big one. But this lateral temporal fenestra, a single hole in the skull, is something that amniotes share ancestrally. This is also an area of really active research. That sentence I just said, if I said it at a conference right now, some people will be mad about it, which is really interesting to me. And that's because we're learning so much. So those are the two characters I want you guys to have for amniota. So the common ancestor of today's mammals and today's reptiles, amniotic egg and lateral temporal fenestra. All right, let's talk about time a little bit. So we've been in the Carboniferous, in those coal swamps. Back in the Devonian, those coal swamps started to get started, and then all through the Carboniferous, they were around. All this Sarcopterygian evolution coming up on the land, tetrapodomorph fishes, true tetrapods, diversification of amphibians and amniotes. Even the reptile and mammal split happens in the Carboniferous. But most of the really, really cool diversity of the Paleozoic, for amniotes anyway, is actually in the last period of the Paleozoic, which is the Permian period. So the Permian goes from 299 to 252. We're finally here, officially. Pangea has coalesced. We have a global supercontinent, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. There's glaciation from the Carboniferous that continues into the early Permian on the bottom of the planet. The southern continents are glaciated at the beginning. But really in the Permian, we start a trend that's almost 100 million years straight of like increasing global temperatures and increasing aridity, almost like a drying out of a lot of the habitats on Earth. So those coal swamps where everything's kind of wet and humid being replaced by dry, in the very general sense, drier, warmer climates. There's huge mass extinctions in the Permian. Two of the big events that we talked about in our mass extinction lab, including the biggest one ever, the end Permian, are both in this period. The one in the middle part of the Permian, which doesn't look in the middle, I know how high it is on the sign right there. That's one of the ones that's most recently been identified and is most thoroughly being studied right now. When we talk about terrestrial ecosystems, a lot of those seed plants are diversifying. So things like conifers, ginkgos, cycads, lots of interesting plants are really showing up and spreading all over the world during the Permian. The bugs are going strong. Things like wasps and beetles show up. You guys can catch them in a net and be like, I know what this is, once we get into the Permian. Amongst the animals we care about today, amniotes, we're starting to get, you saw diadectes, that's your first hint. We're starting to get sort of terrestrial trophic pyramids, layers of herbivores, layers of predators eating herbivores, large-bodied predators eating large-bodied herbivores, interesting food webs happening in the early part of the Permian. Most of the big animals on land are going to be mammal relatives, synapsids, things that are more closely related to you and I than they are to any reptile. That's really interesting. This is the period before dinosaurs. The next period is called the Triassic. We'll get to it soon. That's the age of reptiles. Permian, most of the big animals are mammal relatives, which is a very interesting thing if you're not familiar with it. Tons of stuff happens amongst amniotes though. It's getting modern. There's burrowers, there's climbers, there's gliders even. There's animals that return to the oceans and, marine reptiles in the Permian. It's really, really interesting. And so here's two vignettes of the Permian, two little pictures. Here's the early Permian from a place in Texas. You guys might have seen this animal before in your life with a big sail on its back. It's eating a shark out of the water. There's amphibians swimming around. There's the boomerang head. The early Permian's really interesting. My lab and some of the science I do the most of is actually the late Permian. And these are these mammal dominated communities. They're not really mammals. These are mammal line animals, synapsid animals. But these gigantic predators and lots of the herbivores are these synapsid guys. So we're going to get into that. These are some really, really fun organisms, I think. Any Permian questions, comments? I like this. That ice age, a continental permanent ice cap, once that melts away, you're not going to see another one until the one that we're in, which is super cool to me. I'll let you think about that. All right, so here's a phylogeny of amniotes. You already met the lepospondylus, you already met the diadectomorphs. We're starting to poke up into the Mesozoic up there. On one side of Amniota, we have the synapsids, or the mammal relatives. We'll talk about them on Thursday and Tuesday and next Thursday, so don't worry. Today, we're going to take a right, though, and go over to the reptile side of things. Here's today's living groups of reptiles, snakes and lizards over here, crocs and birds and turtles over here. And then here's some groups of Paleozoic reptiles that are really interesting and help us understand the construction of the reptiles of today, common ancestor of those groups. So I'll take away the magpie and take away the possum. Here's some actual Permo-Triassic synapsids and archosaurs and lepidosaurs. So you can see, kind of like before, everybody's a little bit of a lizard vibe at a glance when we go back this far in time. Permian is when a lot of the ecological dominance and really interesting clade stuff happens, although I think it's important for you guys to realize that the mammal-reptile split is all the way back here in the Carboniferous. Very cool. All right. Oh yeah, there we go. Sauria is the name for crown group reptiles. We'll get to that later though. You don't have to worry about that right now. So here's the first clade I want to tell you guys about of these early reptiles. These are animals called Captorhinids. There's many, many, many species of these things. Some of them get quite big. Let's see what I can put up here. Actually, wait a minute. Why don't you guys talk to your neighbors for a second about these Captorhinids. What you're looking at here is a lower jaw, and you're looking at it in like tooth view. You're looking like down at a lower jaw. Okay, I'll let you guys look at this. Make some observations of them here. Sorry, you know, that was so really.
People have phobias. Oh, I feel like that. This is like the first tryptophobia.
Yeah.
I think it was a walk with the spot the same road. Yeah, there. Yeah. Some
It's like our.
It's like.
All right, what are you guys noticing about these guys?
Question now.
Yeah, what's up, John?
Is there's like this hook at the end,
Yeah.
it's like a meat,
Yeah, there's like this hooking, it looks like, almost to the skull bones, and then the teeth extend really far down.
Right.
You're gonna see that a lot in very different groups of Permian and Triassic reptiles, kind of a little bit in some of the mammally things. I don't know what that's about. You can definitely get food into your mouth a little, you can grab onto stuff, but that overbite is really interesting, huh?
Right.
Pretty fun. What else?
That photo fossil?
Yes,
Is that looking at the roof of the mountain?
this is looking at the lower jaw, like if you were to take my lower jaw and look down on it.
Uh-huh,
And then this is the roof of the mouth of a related animal.
okay.
So taking this, this is the skull and ventral view. This is the lower jaw that would fit right here.
And so it really is just like a field.
It's a field of teeth. They just make teeth up. What's really cool is if I had this fossil and you guys were able to pass it around, it looks like a lower jaw, like it's thin and normal. And then one of the bones like makes this table that shoots towards the tongue. It shoots lingually, and it's just covered with teeth. And those teeth replace each other in irregular ways. Some of these animals get teeth that replace each other in like rows, but sometimes it's just these huge fields. And so this is on the lower jaw, and then this is the upper jaw. What does this even look like to you? This is on the inside of the maxilla.
Looks like the diadect or the diadect.
Well, the diadectids have big, like big single teeth, like big normal looking teeth, right? They're wide. These have these fields of teeth up top, fields of teeth down below. We know that they move them past each other because they're all worn down. Some of these captorhinids we are almost certain, really big herbivores. They're not really, really big. They're like maybe 8 feet long animals. But what an interesting adaptation this is. So instead of broad malariform teeth for chewing up the food, they have these huge fields of teeth that they just rub against each other, almost certainly to process the plant matter before swallowing it back. So a completely different way, we can call this a early draft experiment of like being an herbivore and having to eat tough plants. What if I just make 1 million teeth and they're all cheap and I just burn through them? It's one way to be an herbivore. Pretty fun. So there's a plant, yes. And there's a little nice picture of one with that hook in real life probably isn't as extreme as it looks here. When you put soft tissue like lips and stuff on, we think captorhinids look something like that. Little lizardy guys. Really fun animals, very contentious animals. Some, whether these animals are technically amniotes or technically outside of amniota is pretty controversial right now. All right, here's another really, really, really controversial taxon. This is a little family of lizard-looking animals. Some of them, like this one, have been thought to be really early mammal relatives for a long time. Some of them, like this one, have recently been found to be reptile relatives. Do they go together? Is this 2 different groups that shouldn't be put together? It's a real mess. I'm very happy to say that I'm deeply involved, and so is a lot of ISU's paleobiology right now. But these are really cool animals. One thing you might notice that's very crazy is that the tooth row goes way past the eyeball. Way back here. So some of these things are definite pretty voracious carnivores. They've got mouths that open really wide and teeth that go all the way back that are very sharp, which is very cool. Here's some nice paleo art and some fossils of them. You can see some of these are pretty lizard looking. This one called Ascendinanus is an insane fossil. Look at this thing. Its body outline is there. It's not just the bones. So we can see the scales on its belly and the scales on its feet, even though it's a really, really old fossil. So this is an interesting animal, very lizard-like in its initial appearance, very reptile-like in its initial appearance. Some of the details of it are a little more complicated. This one's kind of fun. This fossil came out a few years ago. It's called Dendromaya. Dendro is tree, Maya is mom. This was found in one of the stumps from those rainforests as those rainforests were falling away. So there it is being reconstructed inside a tree stump with its little baby. Something really funny about this is that this animal is pretty interesting fossil, like it looks really good. And then in the same hole, in the same slab of rock, right next to it is a little thing. But some people think the little thing isn't even the same species. So who knows if this thing's really a mom or not. It's kind of interesting, kind of fun. What's very cool though, one of the reasons people suspected this could be a parental relationship is here's a different taxon called Heliosaurus from South Africa. This is the real fossil. Armored back of the larger individual, I'll say, right here. And then little skull, little skull, little skull all around it. So there's many, well, not many. There's a handful of fossils we have of these animals where there are, we're gonna call it big individuals surrounded by a bunch of small individuals. So is this a parent? Is this like different generations that are just living together because it's safe? We don't know. But it's really interesting because you probably expect to see parental care and things on the mammal side of things, and it might be surprising to see maybe parental care on the reptile side of things way this early back, which is really, really interesting. These are cool animals. They're almost all predators. They definitely give you the lizard vibe. They look like that early amniote. We can say that plesiomorphic condition, the plesiomorphic body plan, the ancestral ball plan. Amniotes just look like little lizards. Anyway, one thing I'll share, because I just think it's really cool, is this specimen is one that I just think is amazing. There's 5 or 6 little ones with this one big one. You can see the armor there on the back. Last year, ISU students and another grad student here in the lab, this is that same specimen. So there's one of the babies, or younger ones, or smaller ones, whatever you want to call it. And here's the larger one. We took this specimen to France and put it in like one of their particle accelerators to X-ray scan it so we could see inside the rock and see how many of them are really in there and all the little details inside their ears and inside their brains and all kinds of cool stuff. And so I took this picture. I'm quite proud of it. That's the giant, like if you're in the room for more than a minute, like you'll die from the radiation, but there's like the laser being shown in its eyeball before we hit the switch and shut the big magnetic doors. So it's really fun. This animal is a big part of current ISU research, which is really, really, really cool. And so sociality in these early animals is interesting. Are they mammal relatives? Are they reptile relatives? This one's got freaking armor on its back, so I'm pretty comfortable calling it a reptile. Other ones, I'm not so sure. So it's a really interesting field of study. You guys, you know, ISU press releases maybe this summer, you'll see something about this, but should be fun. Anyway, it's a funny reason to get to go to France. I recommend it. All right, so that's your Baranopids. The next little notch up the tree in this phylogeny of Permian reptiles is this big old clade here called parareptiles. Parareptiles are extremely special to me. They are so cool. These are the most diverse reptiles of the Permian. The Permian, like I said, when you go dig up fossils, is dominated by mammal relatives. Oh my God, you find so many mammal relatives. They're pretty cool too, but I like my reptiles. And so this group is absolutely doing all kinds of stuff. The earliest marine reptiles, a reptile lineage that goes back into the oceans and lives there and hunts fish and stuff, is a parareptile. There's burrowers, there's bipeds, which is very interesting, bipedal locomotion, hind limb driven locomotion. Durophagy, meaning like crushing up shells, crushing up hard stuff. Large bodied herbivores, and I mean really large bodied herbivores, all in this one big clade, Parareptilia. It's very cool. Here's the early marine reptile. Here is some of those little burrowers and some of these ones that are durophagous, like those little horns they have on their faces. Eyeball, big old cheek horns. These are animals that are also really near and dear to me. I won't go into all the little species names or like clade names because there's like hundreds some maybe species of parareptiles. But these little burrowers are found everywhere. That's my colleague Roger. So I was in Antarctica with him and we were looking at rocks right after the end of Permian mass extinction, right after the mass extinction. And some of these little guys are the most abundant fossils you find there as like survivors of the extinction, like poking up out of their burrows. And so this fossil right there, I know you can't see it too well. That's a skull. And here's the backbone. There's the big ribs. And there's the 2 hands on this skull. So Rogers picked up this rock and there's a perfect little Procolophon underneath it. So we kept that one, which is really cool. Here's one of the ones that thought to be able to locomote on 2 legs, Eutybamus. There's other ones also. Oop. There's these big herbivores, these animals called pariasaurs. This is a pariasaur skull in anterior view, a pariasaur skull in ventral view. Here's a pariasaur tooth. Here's a fun artistic reconstruction of a different species of a pariasaur. We'll talk about them in a second. One of the things I really think is amazing about parareptiles is they evolved in the Carboniferous. They're the most diverse reptiles in the Permian. We're going to talk about it later. They absolutely get crushed by the mass extinction. But like I said, not all of them go extinct. And some parareptiles live for many, many tens of millions of years into dinosaur times alongside the first dinosaurs. Some of the places you find the first dinosaurs, there's totally little parareptiles right there in the same hole in the ground, which is really cool. So this is a very long-lived, successful group of reptiles. Do what I always do, give you guys a second, talk to your neighbors. Any questions, anything you notice about parareptile?
Like strategies, technical preferences. They're heavy constantly. There's a lot of things. It's kind of like but you have to decide that. Yeah. Get the mentality and advance like he's like primarily like it's I do nervous.
They're, some work with like prominent.
Water.
He's not. A lot of. It's not published on.
Yeah.
But there's.
That's where we're at.
Yeah, they were like.
There's some questions about that.
It's third. I think they got pronounced interest.
They're on one family.
Yeah. Wow, small.
Yes, there are some people artists.
Yeah.
Big reptiles.
Their favorite is Diaz.
Teeth.
Their teeth.
Yeah, I know there's some herbivorous teeth, you know, so.
I know that's one of our.
All right, anybody have any comments or questions?
Yeah.
About paraptiles?
You consider them a monophyletic group.
No official comment right now. When I was in college, the professor who taught vertebrate paleontology that I took, one of the things we had to do was every lecture, we had to write a question on a piece of paper to give to him to like say something we wondered about while we were learning that day. And he like lectured, he like talked the whole time. And my question to him was, what are the characters, what are the synapomorphies for all these different animals? And since then, I've still never really received a great answer for that. There are some, of course, they are just a little plastic. They're a little smushy, and other animals than our parareptiles have them, and other animals deeper within parareptiles seem to not have them. So there's a really good amount of data that groups almost all these animals together. I'm not going to talk about it right now in detail, but some of these animals probably go somewhere else. So my answer, I guess, is but not far. What else? Yeah,
The Bunostegus, that looks like a rhino to me,
isn't that great?
like a Sinoceros thing.
This big armored skin. We're going to show you the armor here in a second. Bunostegos is really highly ornamented. A lot of these animals that have that ornamentation, think about that amniote reproductive biology. Are there animals that have to be showy now? Males, females being different from each other potentially for reproductive purposes. Bunostegos has, it really is like bulbs almost of ornamentation on its skull. Its skull bones have these like little globes that stick up. So in real life, that's probably covered in scale and keratin, like horn structure. Really interesting. So yeah, that thing is kind of intense. I'm going to show you more of their armor. These things are armored. The brachiosaurs only are covered in that. This is really cool. These brachiosaurs are herbivores. You can see their teeth. Look at that big smile from Scutosaurus right there. These are their teeth here, these leaf-shaped teeth. When you start seeing teeth with literally delicate like cusps from the side, that's how you know it's a good sign that someone's an herbivore instead of like a carnivore. They're processing plants, they're shredding plants in different ways, pulling the plants up off the bottom, up off their roots maybe. Here's the marginal teeth of a brachiosaur. Here's what those teeth look like. You can see there are teeth on the palate, little tiny ones. There's definitely some processing of plant matter in the mouth. And then again, big old gut on these large-bodied herbivores. Some of these animals are really big. They are like cow size. They are like, maybe not rhino, but like they're getting pretty huge as Permian reptile. And a big capacious gut for digesting plants is really interesting. One thing that's really fun, if you can, remember this tooth and how it looks. Reptiles evolve a tooth like this to eat plants, always. One of my favorite memories from graduate school was from Africa, we had brought back a bunch of these guys. And we had a fragment of a lower jaw of a prize, like just like imagine I had this piece. And one of the guys, it's the guy that his name is Jack Horner. He's the one that Alan Grant is based on for Jurassic Park. He was visiting the museum in Seattle, and he saw that chunk of bone. And he was looking through it because he thinks, "Oh, the Permian's cool. I never think about the Permian." And he picked it up, and he thought it was an armored dinosaur jaw because ankylosaurs, the armored dinosaurs with the clubs on their tail, have teeth that almost identically look like this. So convergent evolution on eating plants if you're a reptile. One strategy is these leaf-shaped teeth. And evolving leaf-shaped teeth to eat leaves is also hilarious and fun. All right. Let me tell you about Paleosaurs more. Here's a good Paleosaur skeleton mounted, so you can see how burly they are, how awesome they are. Some of them are pretty ornamented. This one's from Scotland, and it has all these horns and spikes on its head, which is really, really, really cool. Simple teeth, huge guts. They live everywhere. So this is a subset of paraptiles, the Paleosaurs, in the middle Permian and then the late Permian. So they make it all the way to the end. One of the places where these, here's a fossil that I found. So there's my hand, and I'm holding a piece of armor. So this little osteoderm is from an animal called Paleozoic. These animals, the skeleton here isn't showing it because it's really hard to mount these things. Floating in their skin are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these pieces of armor. So these are armored animals. Why are they armored? Who are they protected against? We'll come back to that later. Herbivores. These are some of the first like kind of big cowy type animals lumbering around in the ecosystem, watching out for predators. They got armor on their backs, which is really cool. There's the armor, if you want an idea of how big they get and how covered they are. These are fun animals. I like them a lot. Okay, I'll tell you this anyway. One of my favorite fossils I ever found, like sometimes if I give a tour, a kid's like, what's your favorite fossil you've ever found? And there's one where I found a Paleosaur skeleton in Zambia, in Africa, that was almost perfect. It was all there. It was like the arm and the ribs and the skull. They were all laid like this. But the fossil was totally crushed, totally destroyed because a bunch of buffalo had like stepped all over it. So it was in a million pieces. We'd never pick it up. So we picked up some armor. And what I liked about it was like, look at this big cow-sized herbivore. It's been dead for 260 million years, and it got stepped on by a bunch of cow herbivores. That's kind of cool. Same place, just 260 million years of time. Niche space remains occupied. I think that's fun. I also like to show people this because I think it's glorious. You'd be hard pressed to go there now, but in Moscow, in Russia, some of the best late Permian fossils are found. And when I went there to look at the fossils they had of other mammal relatives, this is their gallery in Russia. And I couldn't believe this thing, like my jaw dropped when I saw this thing, this like enormous chandelier structure. Every single one of these is a Paleosaur skull. Like these are all skulls of these animals here. And so like New York City has one, and like we've got a couple, and in Russia they just have this like shrine to Paleosaurs, and I can't tell you how delightful it was. Let's look at all these like bas reliefs on the wall of Paleosaurs and stuff. It's fantastic. Anyway, that's the Soviets for you. All right, another group of parareptiles that's really interesting are these little lizardy guys called milleretids. These are another group of animals that are being studied really hard at ISU right now. Again, very lizardy, very like, kind of like, I get it. It looks like a lizard. This is a species I found during my dissertation work that hasn't been described. It might be a new species of these little guys, but you can see how beautiful the skeleton is and how tiny it is. There it is with like a coin next to it. These animals are really important for understanding different things that are happening in reptile evolution in the Permian. And so what I'll show you guys, without getting into details of that, is this. Down at the Idaho Museum of Natural History, when we go down there on our labs, I'll take you guys into the virtualization lab. So we actually uniquely on this campus for like all kinds of natural history museums all over the country and really all over the world have really high powered computing and all the software to like handle doing CT scans and processing CT scans. So this is one of those things I was talking about when I showed you those Varanopids. This is a group of these animals with multiple skulls found together, but they're all embedded in rock. So this is another one that we had scanned with like high powered x-rays. And then undergrads worked at the museum and digitally like segmented out those bones. The rock and the bone have different densities. So if you go in, you can like say, this is bone, and then it builds the whole model up. And so we're getting a lot of understanding of these animals, and they're really, really, really cool and way more important than we realized. And I just thought you guys appreciate knowing this is like big deal research, and it's happening here at Idaho State. Here's another species, one that's more of a burrower. That's its skull as it looks. If you go see the specimen in a museum, it's really bad and beat up. But if you scan with the x-ray, you can see underneath the surface a little bit. It's got this really bumpy skull and like kind of a reinforced skull because it's a little burrowing dude. It's pretty fun. Okay, now I want to go up into the crown group. So you can see here that several of these clades we just talked about all start in the Carboniferous period. They have fossils in the Carboniferous and they live up into the Permian. So if you're going to talk about Permian reptiles, that's probably who you're talking about, but they diversified in the Carboniferous. So what's weird is the crown group here has a fossil record. It goes into the Permian a little bit, but for a lot of the Permian, there's not really a lot of great fossils to help us understand today's reptile diversity. It's pretty weird. That lizard-like body plan, though, keeps going hard up the reptile chain. So there are several groups of reptiles that are found in here that I don't have illustrated on the slide that I wanted to show you guys because I think it's really interesting how many times reptiles kind of play with other body plans in the Permian that have nothing to do with today's diversity. So I'm just going to put these all up on here at once. Here's the Arioslidians. Here's the Claudiosaurs. Here's the Tangosaurs. Here's the Wageltosaurids. Go ahead and talk to each other about these interesting little reptiles from the Permian.
Yeah, it's not the. I'm not inclined to. Yeah.
Well, I like.
They take the sore out. Don't be that. We'll try to compensate that. It's tradition.
What are the? Like, yeah, like.
Yeah. All the springs of the leaf is a small, so it needs to be. Protected, usually involved in providing.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah. All right, what's jumping out about these guys?
Doing lots of beaches.
Lots of fun niche space, right? Like swimming with big old feet, big hands, not a special tail. Swimming, big special tail. Totally different clade down here. Really long, weird tail with big legs. So exploring aquatic ecospace, interesting. Obviously, you guys are talking about the glider, which is very interesting. There are multiple Permian and then later in the Triassic independent evolutions of like going like this out of a tree for little reptiles. This one is, it might look like these are ribs, and there certainly are ribs as part of this structure underneath, but these are dermal structures that stretch out really far like that. So if you've never seen it, you can Google, there's a lizard today called Draco that does use its ribs to go and like glide around in Southeast Asia. So gliding is something that makes sense as an ecological niche space to fill, especially in forested environments. You can move around these like what are for you skyscrapers everywhere instead of going to the ground and then running around like this all the time. Gliding between evolves a lot. And so this is one of the earliest evolutions of gliding that we can see in the fossil record. That's really cool. The thing I did want you guys to say, you said it. Oh yeah, well, there you go. I already had that happen. Is that, yeah, there's a lot of interesting ecological diversity here. There's plenty of animals like this. Petrolachosaurus is like the textbook early reptile, like literally this is in every textbook, and it looks like a lizard. There's plenty of the ones that look just like terrestrial, normal looking lizardy guys the whole time. But I wanted to show you these fun ones that start flirting with like doing other stuff in the Permian before the age of reptiles really kicks off in the Triassic. Okay. So when we get into the crown group though, so on one side, turtles, crocodiles, and birds today, and on the other side, snakes and lizards today. Snakes and lizard side, bird, croc, turtle side. The living clade, the crown group of reptiles has a name, it's called Sauria, which just is like means a lizard literally, which isn't very helpful. But Sauria right here, you can see Sauria has to have diversified sometime in the Permian. There are no Lepidosaurimorph, lizard snake relatives. There are no fossils of them that we're confident about from the Permian. There are a handful of fossils that are on the bird, turtle, croc side that we find in the Permian, but that's it. That's a really important research area, one that I care about a lot. One of the reasons this is frustrating, you guys are going to see it not next week, because we're talking about mammals next week, mammal relatives, but the week after next week is once the Triassic starts, Like when my meter stick here goes like this, there's reptiles everywhere. And so where are they in the Permian is a big problem. So let me show you what I mean. You guys do not, of course, have to read all these names. Here's Carboniferous, here's Permian, here's Triassic. This is a figure from an academic paper. I'll put the boundary right there. All those black blobs are the stratigraphic distribution of the different species. So this species is known from this time. You guys kind of get it, right? Like these blobs show you where in time the fossils are known from, and then the lines connecting them are the phylogeny that we infer. So if I give you guys some structure here, there's that crown group. This side is the lizard and snake side. This side is the turtle, croc, bird side. These are almost all the fossils we have. So there's your lizard, snake, clade. There's your birds and dinosaurs, actually. There's your crocodiles. There's some weirdos like pterodactyls and a bunch of other weird stuff we'll talk about later. What I think I want you guys to talk about for a second is look at the Carboniferous, look at the Permian, look at the Triassic. Tell me about the distribution of the black blobs in this phylogeny. Okay, talk to each other for a second about that.
Terrible.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Really bad. Yeah, one Permian and one big.
Very,
Yeah, I guess that makes some sense. Well, for me, like I haven't heard. To the source. Yeah.
It's like part of that would have been radiation, and post-radiation radiation. What about, and this is at the side, but also actually. Beautiful.
All right, pretend that you're looking at a scatter plot or something. How would you describe the distribution of blobs before and after the red line?
There's a bunch like immediately after.
This made me so furious when I first really synthesized this when I was a grad student. Because there's only a couple of Permian crown group reptiles known. And I will tell you that 2 of those 3 are pretty controversial. There's one that's rock solid, and that's not enough. One. And so for years, I've been asking this question. And so when I go to rocks in Africa to dig up animals, and we find a lot of these mammal relatives you guys are going to learn about, the whole time I'm desperate to find any little reptile that will help. Because look at this, the phylogeny, I believe, but then the actual fossils to fill it in the early Permian, the middle Permian, where are these animals? It's a big problem. So let's talk about how we might have a problem at all. It might not be that those animals didn't exist, of course. Why aren't we finding them? So this is an interesting paper. This is showing late Permian tetrapod ecosystems, ones where we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fossils, and then it's comparing them to one another. And so that tree-looking structure is like a dendrogram kind of thing that's just like comparing this place looks a lot like this place in terms of the kind of animals it has. I'll let you guys look at the blobs spread across Pangea. There's Australia. There's us here in Idaho. Going over to China. There's Pangea. And so you can see there's these different blobs. When we compare at a big gross scale the different animal communities that can be found at all, this is the distribution we see. I'll let you look at that for a second. If I actually show you some of the data underpinning this, you might see that the high latitudes, places in China, this green color, have a lot in common with these southern latitudes. And so what's interesting then is we're wondering, wow, even on Pangea, is there tropical stuff happening, subtropical stuff happening, and high latitude stuff happening? But the high latitude stuff meaning similarity between high latitude faunas on either side of Pangea. We can look at climate, we can look at vegetation, and we see really similar patterns. The plants are distributed in a similar way, where there's similar plants high and low latitude, different plants in the tropics. So that's an interesting kind of fact. If you synthesize the global record from the late Permian, Idaho's got nothing to say, sorry to tell you, about this part of Earth history. Here's the actual raw data there, you guys. So here's 0 degrees north, so the equator, south 20 degrees, south 60 degrees, north 20 degrees, north 40 degrees. These are all different places on the world. So the work I do is in places like Tanzania and Zambia. South Africa is the one we know the most about. And then here's all these colored bars showing you the different kinds of animals that are found in all these different groups, and it's based on the relative proportion, right? This is proportion. So just so you know, there's the only crown group reptiles, the light blue. So where's all the light blue happening? Yeah. Does everybody feel like they found the light blue? So someone said Niger. So look at those bryosaurs. Look how great they're doing. Tell me about those bryosaurs. Dark green are these big paraptiles. Where are they? In terms of being like numerically dominant.
Or equatorial.
Isn't that interesting? These big reptile herbivores are really abundant in terms of like, you know, how many animals on the landscape. 35% of the fossils maybe in a somewhere like Niger, somewhere like Morocco, are these bryosaurs. You find them down here in South Africa. But one thing that you guys don't know, because I haven't told you this, from South Africa, we have like literally tens and tens of thousands of fossil specimens. And from places like here at the equator, because the rocks aren't very fossil rich, there's maybe like 100 or 200 specimens. So in the places where we can see the best, look who's here. These are herbivorous mammal relatives you guys are gonna hear about next week. That's a nightmare. Look how dominant they are. So when I go to a place like Zambia, I gotta deal with those all the time, the mammal relatives. The reptiles, which like that's a reptile group, this green, those captorinids you've already met. Here's the light blue and here's the light blue. The Southern Alps and Niger, the equator. What do you guys think as biologists when I tell you, hey, wait a minute, at a high level of diversity, the reptiles are diverse at the equator and the mammal relative things are more dominant at high latitudes? That ring any bells? Does that sound familiar? Isn't that weird? We have no idea. Nobody's endothermic or anything yet with their metabolisms, probably. But we still have a more mammally dominated stuff at the high where it's cooler probably, and reptile stuff at the equator. So the reality is that the rocks on Earth's surface for this period in time are mostly high latitude rocks. And that might be why we're not finding these reptiles. It's because they live in a place where the fossil record's really not good. That is so cool to me. It doesn't make me feel that much better about the fact that there's that huge gap in the Permian, but it's an answer that I can at least be like, okay, at least there's an answer. So the one archosaur, so bird croc turtle relative that we do have from the late Permian is from Southern Europe, from the equator back then during Pangea times. And we have many specimens of it. It's a cool big animal, 8 foot long sometimes. Proterosaurus, look at this thing. Does that look like what you'd expect? Big old long neck, sprawly arms and legs, really interesting. Also from that part of the world, tropical parts of the world, there's really, really interesting footprints. You guys just yesterday did all that stuff with digits and feet. We find trackways from the Permian. Look at the scales on these trackways. On the toes, on the hand, on the palm, sole of the foot. We find these trackways also from equatorial Pangea, the tropics of Pangea. What's really cool is, this is the skeletal foot. So you guys can see the digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits of Proterosaurus here. This is a phylogeny. We know the skeleton. Here's the extinction. Now we go into the Jurassic. We know the skeleton. We know the skeleton. We know the skeleton. A foot evolves across, the reptile foot evolves across this timeline, but only from footprints from equatorial Pangea. We don't have body fossils. Only from footprints are there evidence for really like advanced dinosaur-y, crocodile-y looking feet. From the late Permian, it's only trackways. So the only stuff we have to even talk about Permian reptile evolution is this one species that we find a couple of fossils of and a bunch of trackways. We have no idea what the animal looked like that made them. We just kind of know what its feet and hands looked like. And its feet and hands look like animals we wouldn't expect to see until the Triassic. That's telling me we're missing a lot of the Permian because it's happening in this tropical area that's super poorly sampled. I know that's a little zoomed in, but it's like what I'm very stoked about. Makes me want to go to Switzerland and look for fossils. So here's like a nice piece of paleo art that came out with that paper that did that continental reconstruction, give you an idea of what that equatorial part of Pangea must have looked like. So I hope you guys are seeing some familiar faces here. There's our captorinids. Here's some of those pliosaurs. Here's a pliosaur having just a terrible time. And some of these mammal relatives. And so this animal here, this pair, totally hypothetical. They're based on those trackways. There should be animals that look kind of crocky and dinosaur-y in the Permian. We haven't found them yet. We've only found some trackways that are probably theirs. And again, only from the equatorial areas. Also, the botanically inclined amongst you might appreciate this flora, which is completely accurate and based on like many, many, many good plant fossils that come from Italy. And so here's a nice look at the Permian. As we go into next class on Thursday, and then next week, the whole week, we're gonna be talking about mammal things, mammal relatives, synapsids in the Permian. This little dude, who's spectacular. These monsters, also spectacular, are mammal relatives, our relatives in the Permian. But today was just about the little reptile guys lurking around. All right, I think that's all I have for you guys today. Happy to take a question if you have it. Otherwise, I will see you Thursday.
Are we, so.